Paula walked down the street, holding her large belly with both hands. She had come to the hospital from a small village, hoping to be immediately admitted to the maternity ward. Unfortunately, as soon as she sat on the city bus, someone snatched her bag and disappeared into the crowd. Paula screamed and rushed to the exit, but the doors had already closed and the bus had started moving. The driver only stopped at the next stop, and poor Paula got off and burst into tears. Her bag contained everything she had prepared for the hospital, as well as her documents, food and money. "What am I going to do now?" she lamented, while indifferent people hurried past her. The sun was beating down on her head mercilessly, and she was thirsty. Paula sat heavily on a bench and closed her eyes. Paula never knew her mother or father. She grew up with her grandmother, Mrs. McCain, in a small village, but nobody knew where they came from. One day, a gloomy elderly woman got off a bus, holding her 5-year-old granddaughter by the hand. They settled in a small house on the edge of the village, and the woman started working as a cook in the farm canteen, but she did not communicate with anyone. Although unsociable, Mrs. McCain loved her granddaughter, but she took care of her in her own way. She never caressed her, pitied her, or said a kind, comforting word. Paula longed to feel the warmth of a human soul and dreamed of something unattainable. Sadly, her grandmother passed away, leaving Paula alone. After finishing school, Paula chose not to leave the village to study, but instead got a job at a local farm, continuing her quiet, measured life. Time passed, and Paula turned 25. Occasionally, she went to the city for her errands. During one of those trips, she met John. He was coming out of a store, and she collided with him so hard that his groceries fell to the ground. Paula gasped and started picking them up, and that's how they met. Agreeing to meet the next day, Paula arrived with tomatoes from her garden. "Try these, they're delicious. Your store-bought ones bounced like balls on the pavement," she said. John laughed. "Well, no one has ever come to a date with me with tomatoes before." Suddenly, he felt at ease with Paula, and she barely looked at him, realized that she had fallen in love with him for the first time and for life. They dated for a few months, and sometimes John stayed overnight. One evening he proposed to Paula. She cried with happiness and confessed that she was pregnant. John was overjoyed. The next day he told his mother that he was going to marry. "Thank God, son," Mrs. Nobbs breathed a sigh of relief. "Finally you've made up your mind. Is Erica happy?" "What does Erica have to do with this? I'm not marrying her. I'm marrying Paula. She's unusual, beautiful, intelligent." "Johnny, what a silly joke. And where did you find her? Are you drunk?" "Mum, I met her on the street and it was love at first sight. She's from a small village herself." "Well, now it's all clear. You found a country girl and got drunk with joy. Great. They're used to drowning everything in alcohol, both happiness and sadness," said her mother with disgust. "Mum, why are you saying such things?" John protested. "Paula is not like that. And I had a drink at the bar on my way home. And anyway, when will you stop controlling me?" "How can I not control you when you're constantly pulling off different tricks? Good Lord, son, what have you done? Erica is such a good girl, and what a wealthy family she is from. You were supposed to have a bright future." "Mum, I'm not struggling either. I have a good position at a car repair shop." "That's it, Mum. I don't want to discuss this with you any more." John turned around and left, and Mrs. Nobbs sank heavily into her chair and thought. She couldn't allow such shame, so she picked up the phone and called someone. A week later, John went to see the girl and told her that he urgently needed to go to the capital on business. "I'll be back in a week, and we'll apply for marriage registration right away. Just wait for me," he promised, and then disappeared and didn't answer the calls. So Paula decided to go to his home, overwhelmed with worry. Mrs. Nobbs opened the door and confirmed that John had married another woman. "I don't believe you." The girl shook her head. Mrs. Nobbs showed her some clumsily made photo montage wedding photos, but tears prevented Paula from seeing them clearly. She could only see the happy face of John, who was clutching his beautiful bride in his arms. The girl, lowering her head, walked away, and Mrs. Nobbs looked after her without regret. John, on his way home with gifts for his bride, was unaware of what had happened. He missed her very much because he had forgotten his phone at home and could not even call her. He had no idea that it was his mother who pulled it out at the last moment. John dreamed of hugging his beloved, but was distracted from the road and suffered a terrible accident, which left him in a coma. Paula did not know that John was not guilty in front of her. She did not even suspect that human meanness had separated them, and that her lover had undergone many operations and was lying in a coma. Paula decided to live for her baby and dedicate herself to him. However, even fate turned away from her. When the time came to give birth, Paula found herself alone, without money or documents, in a city full of indifferent strangers. In terrible pain, she screamed, and someone passing by called an ambulance just in time. The girl was taken to the maternity ward, where she gave birth to a healthy baby. An elderly nurse leaned over Paula and said, "You have a boy." "Troy, my son," Paula whispered, and at that moment her heart stopped. 7 years passed, and one day John, who was now a drunk and wheelchair-bound man, was slowly wheeling himself home when he saw a group of teens in an alleyway. They were shouting and kicking someone. John rushed over and yelled, "Get out of here, you brats! Get out!" He rolled into the crowd, and the teen hooligans scattered, and on the ground, still covering his head with his hands, lay a little boy. "Hey kid, are you alive?" John leaned in towards him. The boy lifted his dirty, shaggy head and wiped a thin stream of blood from his nose with his hand. His lip was also split. "Why did they do this to you?" John scrutinized the child's dirty face, feeling a growing concern. "They take away the money I beg for. I didn't give it to them twice, and they said I would suffer." "What's your name?" John asked, looking closely at the boy. He felt like he had seen him somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. "Troy," the boy answered. "And I'm John. Troy, why are you begging? Where are your parents?" "I never had any. My mum died. My dad left me before I was ever born." The boy waved his hand bitterly. "I was in an orphanage. But it was bad there too. Everyone was fighting, stealing food, so I ran away." The boy sighed. "Are you hungry, Troy?" asked John. "Yes, hungry." The boy nodded and wiped his face again with his dirty sleeve. "Come with me, I'll feed you." "No, you're bad, I don't want to," the boy replied. "Why am I bad?" John was surprised. "You have whiskey in your pocket, and those who drink a lot of whiskey become angry later," the boy answered. John pulled a bottle out and threw it in the trash. "I bought it for another man. Let's go." They stopped at a fast food cafe where John bought Troy a hamburger and a juice. The boy swallowed it all in one gulp. "You have such a good appetite," said the man, watching the child devour the second hamburger while sitting on a chair and swinging his feet in torn sandals. "Where are you sleeping, Troy?" "Wherever I have to. It's warm now, but in the winter I'll go back to the shelter," sighed the boy. "Troy, if you'd like, come to my place. You can take a shower there and sleep in a clean bed," offered John. Mrs. Nobbs, aged by grief, opened the door to her son. Since that accident, He had been laying down, unable to get up for 2 years. Erica turned away from him as soon as she learned he would most likely be disabled forever. But John was not worried about her. He was worried about Paula, who had disappeared. Mrs. Nobbs lied to her son, telling him that Paula had laughed when she heard about the accident and said that she didn't need a man like him and that she was soon getting married to someone else. Since then, John was depressed and drank a lot because of it. And now, opening the door, Mrs. Nobbs was very surprised to see her son with a boy. But looking at the child's face, the woman pressed her palm to her lips in shock. He and John looked alike. Inviting the guests to the table and pouring tea into cups, the elderly woman asked with a trembling voice where his mother was. "My mum has passed away. I already informed John. Her name was Paula McCain." Upon hearing the name and surname of his beloved woman, John turned pale and let out a cry of pain, despair, and joy. Troy, scared, rushed into the hallway but stumbled over the mat and fell. Suddenly, a miracle happened. John jumped out of the wheelchair, came to Troy, picked him up, pressed him to himself, and only then he felt his strength leave him, and he and the child sank to the floor. "My son, my dear son," John said, hugging the boy tightly. "The Lord has given me a second chance for a happy life." After everyone calmed down and Troy fell asleep, John confessed everything she had done to her son. John shook his head reproachfully for a long time, and then approached and sat down next to his son. He already knew that he would live for Troy and do everything for him so that he never lacked anything. "I had Paula a long time ago, and now I will have our son. And in him my happiness lies, so bitter and so dear to my heart."